Yes, we'll get started. It's 4 o'clock, so we want to keep this going this afternoon. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you all here today joining this webinar. We are pleased to be able to host this. I'm Ed Brubaker. I'm the CEO of Living Branches, and it's really an honor and a privilege to have all these people on. I think we're at 73 now, and we're expecting well over 100 persons joining today. So we're ecstatic to be able to do this for you today and really pleased about that. Today's webinar is really part of the process that we've been doing in Living Branches these last few weeks to try to educate both staff and residents about the COVID vaccine. And really feeling that since we have chosen not to mandate the vaccine for residents or staff, that the most important thing for us to do is to educate people, to help them reduce their fear around the vaccine, to increase the understanding about how it works, because we really do believe that it is our best chance to get to the other side of this disease that has impacted us in significant ways during this past year. And so it's just really important to do that. A good friend of mine who's now in his 90s, a mentor of mine, many years ago told me, he said, the root of most issues, most conflict in the world is fear and ignorance. And as I've thought about that over the years, it really has rung true with me, because we as human beings, at our core, at the core of who we are, fear is a big part of what is part of who we are as humans. And so education and learning and knowledge and overcoming fear is a great way to combat both fear and ignorance. And so we are just ecstatic and excited to be able to present this webinar here today. And I will turn this meeting over to Kathleen Roberts at this point in time. Kathleen was instrumental in making the connections with Penn to bring our speaker here today. So Kathleen will be introducing our speaker. They will speak, and then we'll have time for Q&A at that point as well. So thank you, Kathleen, for making this connection, and we are just very pleased and excited to present this seminar today. So Kathleen, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I want to first give a shout out to Kathy Jedzruski, the PhD Deputy Director at the Institute of Aging at the Perelman School of Medicine. She's the one who reached out to Dr. Weissman on behalf of Living Branches. Dr. Weissman graciously accepted our invitation to join today. So thank you, Kathy, for your assistance. Drew Weissman, MD, PhD, is a professor of medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He received his graduate degrees from the Boston University School of Medicine. Dr. Weissman, in collaboration with Dr. Katie Carrico, discovered the ability of modified nucleosides in RNA to suppress activation of innate immune sensors and increase the transition of mRNA containing certain modified nucleosides. The nucleoside modified mRNA lipid nanoparticle vaccine platform that Weissman's lab created is what is being used in the first 2 approved COVID-19 vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna. They continue to develop other vaccines that induce potential antibody and T-cell responses with mRNA-based vaccines. Dr. Weissman's lab also develops methods to replace genetically deficient proteins, edit the genome, and specifically target cells and organs with mRNA LNPs, including lung, heart, brain, and CD4+ cells. It is truly an honor, and with very grateful hearts, that Living Branches welcomes Dr. Weissman to today's webinar entitled Understanding mRNA and the COVID-19 Vaccine, Addressing Safety Concerns of Long-Term Care Employees. Dr. Weissman?
Great. Thank you very much for having me speak to you.
So when you say that you've been studying this really for decades, are there other treatments where people are already using this technology? And is that part of the reason that we know that it's safe?
So we've been developing this vaccine in preclinical models, which means in animal models. This is the first time RNA has been used as a vaccine in people. It's been studied in people for about 6 years. So the first, the way you develop a vaccine is you test it in animal models, show that it prevents the infection, show that it's safe, and then you move it into people. That occurred first about 6 years ago with influenza vaccines using the identical mRNA LNP vaccine platform. So this vaccine has been tested in humans for over 6 years, and it's been shown to be effective and safe in people for influenza. It's been tested in human models for rabies virus infections and a number of other infections, all in clinical testing. For coronaviruses, it's been studied in animals for about 7 years for a variety of coronaviruses, including the first SARS and MERS viruses that occurred as epidemics about 18 and 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's been well studied in humans. It's been extensively studied in animal models and has shown very good efficacy in phase 3 clinical trials and very good safety. So what people need to understand is that the vaccines, both of them are about 94 to 95% effective at blocking any viral infection with COVID, mild, moderate, and it's 100% effective at blocking severe disease. So what that means is that the trial found that 95% efficacy at blocking symptomatic infection. What's interesting is that they also saw that there was about a 70% efficacy at blocking asymptomatic infection. And asymptomatic infection is what we're extremely concerned about because it's difficult to prevent when you don't know you have symptoms. So that's why we say wear masks, because the mask will block even asymptomatic people. If somebody is at home, sick, coughing, you know that they're infected, they're not going out, they're not transmitting. It's the asymptomatic people that we're really concerned about. What was most striking from these trials, though, is that the vaccine was effective in aged population, in people over 65 years old. And it was just about as effective in aged as it was in young people. It was equally effective in all races, in people with other medical problems, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypercholesterol, really all other clinical diseases. So it's very safe and very effective.
Can you, so we're getting a lot of questions in. Can you clarify for us? We have a person asking, does this mean that COVID-19 has been around a lot longer than just this last year?
So it's been in bats probably for hundreds of thousands of years. And there are thousands and thousands of coronaviruses in bats. We're studying them, other people are studying them. We're studying them because we're trying to make a vaccine against the next coronavirus pandemic, which against the next virus that crosses over from a bat into a person somewhere in the world. So we want to have a vaccine ready before that virus spreads and causes another COVID vaccine, a pandemic.
So one of the things, as you know, we represent retirement communities. So we have people right now, we have a fair number of our staff persons who by mandate are having to be tested for COVID twice a week. And so one of the questions that we all want to know is, when can we stop being tested for COVID? But our understanding is that as of right now, there's no real information about whether or not if you have the vaccine, even if it's preventing you from being sick, they don't know if it can prevent you from transmitting the virus. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so we have a little. What the trials did is they looked at disease. They didn't look at prevention. It's difficult to make a trial in 2 months that looks at prevention of transmission. That's something you look at later as the trials go on. We'll know that in a couple of months.
Okay.
What we did find out from the Moderna trial, they did swabbing of everybody in their trial. I don't know how often they did it, but they did it, they followed. They found about a 70%, a little under 70% reduction in asymptomatic disease by the vaccine. Now, what we don't know is that the 1/3 who still had asymptomatic disease, whether they could transmit to somebody else. We just don't know that yet. So
Okay.
what we say is you still need to wear masks.
We're getting used to them.
Yeah.
Do you have information about how long, we have a question about how long it takes to start developing antibodies after you've taken the vaccine?
So the data from Pfizer was you have 52% protection after the 10 days after the first shot, and 95% 7 days after the second shot.
Okay. That for people who are used to taking the flu vaccine, where it's kind of like 50-50 if it's going to affect in a positive way, that's amazing numbers.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, it's amazing for any respiratory virus. I've never seen a vaccine this high for a respiratory virus. I mean, the only thing close to this high is measles.
Okay. How can we be sure that this vaccine will not cause long-term negative impact in humans? Like, that's one of our big questions that we hear a lot.
So, I mean, the first is to understand what the vaccine is. The mRNA in the vaccine is identical to the RNA in your cells. So the RNA in your cells isn't causing long-term adverse events. So the RNA in the vaccine won't either. The RNA is degraded probably within a week, it's completely gone. The lipid nanoparticles contain 4 types of fat. 2 of the fats are identical to what's in our cells. They're physiologic. The other 2 are present at incredibly low levels. They are gone within 24 to 48 hours. They're just, the body degrades them, they're gone. So nothing of the vaccine is left after days to a week or so. The question that comes, well, then how do you get a long-term adverse event? Well, you can't from any components of the vaccine because they're gone. The mRNA does not integrate into the DNA. It doesn't affect the DNA. It doesn't change the DNA. It doesn't mutate the DNA. It does nothing to the DNA. So that's one of the social media myths that you have to throw out. It doesn't do anything to the DNA. It's just hard to imagine how it could have long-term effects. 90% of adverse events to vaccines happen in the first 6 weeks. We haven't seen anything. 15 million people have gotten the vaccine already. The only really serious adverse event is this anaphylaxis-like reaction that we're seeing in about 1 in 100,000 people. Other than that, there really nothing, 15 million people have been injected. That's a lot of people. And if we were going to see an unusual adverse event, would you care about something that occurred less than 1 in 15 million? You know,
Well,
you just don't.
I don't have better, I have worse odds than that to win the lottery, right? And that
Exactly.
never happened to me either.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's very interesting. It says, if the vaccine has been in the making for years, do you have a suggestion as to why we keep hearing in the press about this being a newly developed vaccine?
Well, no. So, because the press is misstating that. It's the first time this kind of vaccine has been approved for people. It's been in clinical trials for 6 years, but it's the first time that it's approved, that the FDA has approved it. So they read that as brand new, but it's not.
Okay. One of the questions, so we have a lot of young women who are working for us. And one of the questions that we get a lot when we're trying to educate people is whether or not the vaccine could potentially impact fertility or future fertility.
Yeah, so there's no reason to think that. There's no reason. We have no data on that. For animals, we've immunized mice, macaques, and a bunch of other animals, and then they've gotten pregnant without any problem. They're just, you know, I never say never, because who knows, but there just isn't any data that there's any effect on fertility. You know, the one thing that we don't know about, and the FDA was a little cagey, was on pregnant women, on whether you should vaccinate pregnant women. The issue is that COVID can be very bad in pregnant women. Mm-hmm. But we don't know what the risks of the vaccine are yet. My guess is that the risks of the vaccine are going to be lower than the risks of having COVID if you're pregnant, but I don't know. So, you know, the FDA basically said, talk it over with your doctor if you really want to do it, but they didn't say do it. And I agree with that. We need to study pregnant women more. Okay.
Here's a question asking, is it possible that this mRNA vaccine can cause potential cytokine storms?
Yeah, so no. Again, it's 15 million people. We haven't seen it. There's, you see cytokine storm with chemotherapy, with CAR T cells, with certain types of infection. We just don't see it with this vaccine.
Okay.
With any vaccine.
One of the questions, another question here is, of the two kinds of fat that are in the vaccine that are in this very small amount, what is the source of this fat, since these two kinds do not come from our cells?
So we don't know. 3 of the 4 are synthetic. They're made chemically in a test tube. 1 of the 4, the companies haven't told us where they get it from. Cholesterol. And one source is from lanolin. But I don't know if the companies, I just don't know what source the companies use. So it could be from lanolin, it could be synthetic. They just haven't told us.
Okay. Is that concerning that they haven't told us?
No, I don't think they're required to tell us where the chemicals come from. The FDA doesn't require it.
The other question about where things come from, the other one, of course, that we hear is, are there fetal cells that are used in the vaccine?
Never. There's no reason to use fetal cells at all in this process of making a vaccine. The PETA people will be upset that they were tested in mice and tested in macaques, but those are the only animals. And then I think it was tested in ferrets also, but those are the only animals that were used. No fetal cells were used.
Okay. Can you explain why the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines need 2 doses versus some of the other ones that we might be hearing about?
So the only one that's a single dose is the Johnson and Johnson. We haven't seen their efficacy data yet, so we don't know. The AstraZeneca was approved in the UK. That's the one where they screwed up the trial. Their efficacy is, they're reporting it as 70%. The J&J, we'll see. To me, it comes down to, do you want a vaccine that's 95% effective or 70% effective? If the Johnson and Johnson is 95% effective with a single dose, I would say use that, because 1 dose is a lot easier than 2.
Is the Johnson and Johnson based on the mRNA, or is it a different technology?
No, it's an adenovirus.
Okay. So it actually has a little bit of the virus in it.
No, so what they do, so adenovirus is a common cold virus. It's everywhere. They take the spike protein from the coronavirus and they put it in the adenovirus. So the only thing in the J&J is the spike protein.
Okay. Here's a question of, if the vaccine was in clinical trials or if mRNA was being used in clinical trials for 6 years, for which diseases were they testing it during those times? And were the clinical trials stage 1 on mice, etc., or was it tested for 6 years on humans?
No, these were human trials. The phase 1s are human.
Okay.
The first 2 were influenza vaccines. One of them was a rabies vaccine. There have been a bunch of cancer RNA vaccines. There's a big cancer vaccine trial going on right now with RNA.
Which leads to one of the questions, which is, if it's been being tested for over 6 years, like, why does that take so long versus this?
Yeah, so all vaccines take that long. I mean, you've heard on the news, they're talking most vaccines take anywhere from 5 to 20 years to make. The way a drug company does it is they do a phase 1 trial. They spend 6 months evaluating the data. They spend 6 months deciding, do they want to do a phase 2? Then they do a phase 2. They spend 6 months evaluating the data, another year deciding, do they want to do a phase 3? So for influenza, there's plenty of influenza vaccines. They're not in a rush to do it in 10 months.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about, do you have information regarding how long the vaccine will protect against the COVID?
Yeah, we just don't know. The data we do have, Moderna looked, I think it was 119 days after the second immunization. And so you measure neutralization titer level. So how much neutralizing antibodies are in the blood. They saw that it dropped a little, but that's 2 time points. So you can't make a prediction on 2 time points. We'll probably know within the next year how long it lasts. It's going to be at least a year. It might be 5 years. It might be longer. We just don't know yet.
And can you clarify, does the vaccine protect people from getting infected in the first place, or is it just lessening the symptoms if they do get infected?
So that was the Moderna data that I mentioned. It reduced asymptomatic infection by 70%.
Okay.
It reduced symptomatic infection by 95%. So that's preventing, you're preventing at least 2/3 of infections.
Okay. We've, of course, in social media and in the news these days, you hear everything and anything. So what about this information that perhaps Pfizer is hiding things from us with regard to the vaccine? Any thoughts about
that? The FDA is a pretty strict parent. I can't imagine that Pfizer would hide anything from the FDA or from us.
There's been a lot also in the news, especially in the last couple of days, about the mutations that they're seeing in the virus, and how could those potentially be impacted by the vaccine?
Yeah, so I don't like the word mutation, because what they are. So the COVID-19 last probably a year ago, November, was a bat virus, and it was only in bats. It suddenly made the jump to humans. That was the first time that we know of that it had ever been in a human. Humans are, of course, very different from bats. So the first thing the virus is going to do is learn how to infect humans better. So these mutations are completely expected. And what they are is they're adaptations. The virus is learning how to grow better in humans. It knew how to grow well in bats. Now it's in humans, it has to figure out how to grow well. So they're going to keep happening. And that's just what a virus does. It wants to grow faster. The concern is that, will the vaccine still work? Mm-hmm. So far, the UK mutation, the vaccines seem to work fine. BioNTech published that. For the South African mutation, the only data we have is they looked at convalescent sera. So sera from people who were already infected. And what they found is that if people had a low titer of antibody, the virus wasn't neutralized. If they had a high titer, the virus was neutralized. The only thing we know is that the vaccine gives you high titers of antibodies, higher than most convalescent patients. So we think that it's going to be effective. We'll have an answer in the next week or two, whether it'll work against all of these adaptations.
And if I understand what you were just saying there, which may not be the case, but were you saying that really it looks like the vaccine gives you more antibodies than having COVID?
Yeah.
So because we have a fair number of our employees who've gotten COVID, and there's been a question about, should I get the vaccine or should I not? You're saying yes, get the vaccine.
So the recommendations that I see are wait 90 days after you've had COVID and then take the vaccine. That's not based on data. I think the way they determine that is, we know that that having COVID, you'll remain protected for 90 days. And we know that if you take the vaccine right after COVID, you might have more, sore arm, flu-like syndrome type of symptoms.
Can you talk? Some vaccine objections sound like conspiracy theories. Any thoughts on how we can continue talking about this to people? That's maybe a little more fact-based.
Yeah. So the problem is that it's hard to argue with somebody who's not using facts. You can present facts to them all you want, and they're not going to believe them. I think there's two kinds of people on social media. There's the true anti-vaxxers, whose primary goal is to not have vaccines anywhere. And they've made up all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories. And we've all heard them, we all blow them off and say that's crazy. There's another group of people who are just nervous. They say the vaccine is 11 months old. I don't want something that hasn't been around very long put in my body. And they'll pick up on these conspiracies as a way of saying, oh, this is why I shouldn't take it. but the real reason they don't want to take it is that it's brand new.
Yeah.
So I think what you have to tell those people are 15 million people have taken the vaccine so far. We haven't seen any adverse, bad things happen.
And that it is difficult, isn't it? Because you will say that, and of course the response is, well, they're just not telling you about the bad things that have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the way social media works, if one bad thing happened anywhere in the world, I suspect you would hear about it in seconds.
I think that's a very true statement. Can you shed a little bit of light on how it's possible that, and I don't suppose that there's really any way to know this, but we can think of plenty of instances where we've had people who've been exposed to the virus and never developed symptoms. And then we have people who've tested positive or perhaps had symptoms. We have no idea how they got it. So
Yeah.
do you, any thoughts on that?
I think it's around 50% of people have asymptomatic infection. So they're walking around spreading the virus. They have no idea that they're infected. So if you've got somebody who has no idea they're infected, who walks into the room, who touches your plate, who coughs, who does anything, you can get infected. So and that was the big concerning thing, and that's why masks were pushed, because if half the people don't have any symptoms, but they're spreading the virus, what do you do about them?
Right.
Good question.
Yeah. That is one of the challenges that we experience, of course. I'm not sure who asked that, who made that comment, but yeah, that is one of the challenges that we experience here, where we're living in close community and working very, very closely with people, is that it can spread so easily from people who don't have any symptoms.
Yeah.
Very scary and challenging for us. Question here about, does the body make antibodies to the mRNA in addition to the spike, or is that not the same thing?
Yeah, so the way it works is that, so mRNA is the intermediate. In our cells, the DNA is in the nucleus. The DNA is our genetic code. Every single protein that makes our body work is in the DNA. The way the body makes a protein is that an RNA copies one of those protein sequences. So the RNA is made in the nucleus. It copies a protein sequence. Then the RNA goes out of the nucleus, and a machine essentially reads it and decodes the code of the RNA and makes a protein off of it. So the RNA is the middleman. Its only job is to make protein.
Okay.
We give a spike RNA. That RNA goes into a cell, and the same machine reads it and makes the spike protein. So it's, if you think about it, the RNA is a safer way, because we give a lot of protein drugs, insulin, erythropoietin, monoclonal antibodies. All of those are protein drugs. And the way they make them is they put them into a 50,000 liter drum with cells that produce the protein and secrete it. And then they purify that protein and they give it to people. The problem is what if that cell makes a mistake? What if it doesn't fold the protein quite right? What if it doesn't add the right sugar to it? There's a lot of things that when our proteins are made are modified. What's happened in the past is that some protein drugs lead to bad events because the cells didn't make them right. or something happened to that changed the protein, and all of a sudden the protein becomes immunogenic. You make an antibody. So if you make an antibody against erythropoietin, then you can't make red blood cells anymore. What the RNA does is the RNA uses our body to make the protein, and our body knows how to make proteins correctly. So the RNA is really safer than protein drugs. It's just a different way of delivering a protein drug.
Interesting. So we, in our organization, there's definitely a generation gap, if you will, between people who are wanting to get the vaccine and people who are a little bit more hesitant. In our residents, we're getting close to about 90% of them are being vaccinated. And for staff, it's less, but we're still doing well. So we have a lot of people who've gotten vaccinated already. And some people are experiencing reactions and some are not. Is there any correlation between the strength of the reaction that you experience after being vaccinated and how well you're protecting yourself against the infection?
Yeah, we don't know for sure yet, but we don't think so. So when you say reactions, you're talking about a sore arm or a fever or a flu-like syndrome.
Yep.
80% of people get sore arms. What's interesting is that aged people get fewer of those effects. So 80% of 50-year-olds get a sore arm. Probably 40% of 80-year-olds get a sore arm. So I suspect the folks in your facilities aren't having a lot of reactions, and they're probably a lot milder than what the younger people are getting. What that is that's so in a vaccine you have the protein, the spike protein, and you have an adjuvant. What an adjuvant does is it stimulates the immune system so that it's kind of like putting gas in the car. If you just put the spike protein in without any stimulant, without any adjuvant, it would just sit there and the body would ignore it because it doesn't, the body only tells foreign when there's inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So the adjuvant gives the inflammation. The sore arm, the fever, the flu-like syndromes, that's the adjuvant. That means that the vaccine is kickstarting your immune system to work better. Some people just have more reaction than others.
Good. Yes. Okay.
Is it possible that this year's vaccine would have some kind of a side effect that would end up making us more vulnerable to the same virus a year from now? Or could this in any way impact our own natural antibodies or somehow make us more likely to get the disease?
So not with coronavirus. There are a couple of viruses where we worry about that. Dengue is one, HIV is another, where because of these sort of complicated viral dynamics, a vaccine can make it worse. With coronavirus, we've tested this, we don't see that. There is no potential for enhancement of infection with this vaccine.
Do you have any sense of when, what number of vaccinated persons do we need to get to in order to get herd immunity, which we've all heard so much about?
Yeah, we really don't know. People are guessing anywhere from 75 to 85%.
Okay.
But it's a guess. Now, what you have to remember is nobody under 16 is getting the vaccine right now. And the hope is that kids will start getting it maybe by summertime. They're doing the studies now. So, even if we immunize 80% of all the adults, we still have to worry about the kids.
Yeah. Well, and right now it seems like nobody under the age of 65 is getting the vaccine
Well, yeah,
at all.
yeah.
I know we only have just a few more questions. There was something we heard on KYW yesterday or the day before where they were saying, do not take acetaminophen or ibuprofen after you get the vaccine or even before. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's another unknown. Where those studies come from are people analyzed taking, it was really NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, with influenza vaccines. And what they found is that if you took an NSAID with the influenza vaccine, you got a lower response. Nobody has looked at that with mRNA vaccines in COVID. So we don't know. I certainly wouldn't take prednisone. I wouldn't take a non-steroidal. I think Tylenol is probably okay, but I don't know for sure. Usually the adverse events, your arm is sore for 12 to 24 hours. You've got a fever for 12 hours and then it goes away. So I usually tell people just tough through it. It won't last long.
And are there groups of people who are inherently resistant to the virus? We've all heard about different blood types. Maybe there's some kind of correlation there.
Yeah, we really don't know that well. I mean, what we do know is that all races get the virus, and some do worse than others. There are people looking at gene signatures. So what that involves is you sequence every gene, every RNA in the cells, and you'll see that some people that certain genes associate with more disease versus less disease. But we're not at a point where we can do a blood test and say you don't have to worry about the virus.
And how, I like this question, how optimistic are you that we might be getting close to the end of this with the introduction of these vaccines?
So what you have to remember there is that we're currently immunizing the US, Western Europe, Israel, probably China and Russia, but we're not immunizing most of the rest of the world. And that's where all the people are. The new viruses that keep popping up are concerning. What's going to happen is we can immunize all of the US and Europe. It's going to be a year or two before we get to Africa, Asia, South America, the rest of the world. During that time, new viruses are going to keep popping up. And the fear is that someday a virus won't be protected by the current vaccine. And then we might have to start over. Ideally, if we could vaccinate the entire world in 6 weeks, that wouldn't happen. But we know that isn't going to happen.
So if we have to start over, then it sounds like almost mRNA, the technology behind that could easily be applied to something else. And maybe that's not correct.
No, it is. So I was talking with Ugur Sahin, who's the CEO of BioNTech. He said it would take 6 weeks to make a new vaccine and to have it ready to go.
Wow. That's just astonishing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of residents who are with us who are very eager to see their families again, to get life back to normal as quickly as possible. And it's been close to a year now, of course, as we all know. And we are pushing with everything that we can to try to get people to take the vaccine, to not be afraid, because we don't have any other plan. Yeah. Is there another plan? Like if people don't get vaccinated, what are our other options?
nobody has come up with a drug that really works well. The remdesivir was out a while ago. It really doesn't work that well. Monoclonal antibodies work if you take them the minute you have symptoms. The longer you wait, the less well they work. We really don't have good alternatives to a vaccine. Mask wearing and social distancing is the best we can do right now.
Okay. Let's see, I want to make sure I get all questions. I see another one here that says, if someone is on a low dose of prednisone, such as 5 milligrams or less, will the vaccine work?
Yeah, so what we don't know. My guess is that it probably will work. It may not work as well. 5 milligrams is pretty much what our bodies make naturally. So 60 milligrams is a high dose. And I would worry if it was 60 milligrams that the vaccine isn't going to work well. At 5 milligrams, my guess is that the vaccine will work.
Okay. And this might be my favorite question. How optimistic are you that the end is in sight? At all?
So, I mean, I think in the US by summer or fall, everything is going to be open again. People aren't going to be wearing masks. Kids are going to be back in school. People will be visiting friends and relatives and traveling again. You're not going to be able to travel to South Africa for a while. You're not going to be able to travel to lots of parts of the world. The problem is that we are an intermingled world. Mm-hmm. So my only fear, or my big fear, is that some virus is going to change and be resistant to the vaccine. And somebody is going to come over from wherever and bring that virus and start a new pandemic. That's what we have to watch out for.
And I don't know if this is, I assume this is a conspiracy theory, but you're talking about the fact that the coronavirus, this particular one, was originally in bats. Like that's where it had been brewing for hundreds of thousands of years, and then it made the jump to humans. Why did it make the jump to humans? Did it have help making the jump to humans?
So you have to look back. Over the past 20 years, we've had 3 coronavirus epidemics. This is just something that coronaviruses do. This is something that viruses do. Some viruses like to jump from one animal to another. Nobody helped this virus do it. There's no way that you can manufacture a virus to infect people that looks like a coronavirus.
Okay. Do you expect that people, we're getting vaccinated now, we've got our little vaccine cards. Do you think that we're going to need those in order to fly or go on vacation or travel within the country even?
I suspect for a while we will. I know some airlines are proposing to only take vaccinated people. I know that the problem is that private industry can do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. So your local gym might say, we'll only let vaccinated people in, and you have to have a card to go in. We have no control over that. It's not, a lot of your residents probably have their polio cards in their records somewhere, and they had it for a little while to show everybody that they had been immunized against polio, and then they put it away. I think the same thing will happen with the COVID card.
Do you have a message perhaps that you could share with us that we could give to our 30-year-old, nurses and CNAs who are like, I just want to wait?
Yeah, so, I think what they have to look at is, we do, I'm a physician, we do a risk benefit analysis on everything, every decision we make. So what are the risks of the vaccine? Right now, the risks are sore arm, maybe flu-like syndromes for a day. 1 in 100,000 people may get anaphylaxis. Those are the only risks from the vaccine. What are the risks from coronavirus? Well, for 30-year-olds, 0.5% of people die. 2% of people go into a hospital and are put on oxygen, are put on ventilators, are in the hospital for 10 to 14 days. Compared to 1 in 100,000 versus 2%, to me, there's just no comparison. The risk benefit is so sloped towards taking the vaccine. You shouldn't have to explain that to people.
Yes, I think we were so excited to see the vaccine was available and in such a record amount of time, that it is something that has, in some ways, I think, caught some of us by surprise that people are so hesitant about it.
Yeah.
But we are trying to make sure that we're doing, like I said, doing everything that we possibly can to help people get educated about it so that they can make a good decision and feel confident in their decision. So, well, it's 5:10 and I want to be respectful of time. We will make the question and answer portion of this available. So we did record. Dr. Weissman, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for taking the time to come here today. I want to say thank you for being smart enough to help figure all of this out. We are so grateful that there are people who are using what we would say their God-given gifts and abilities to make life better for us all. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we will send out a link to the Q&A portion of this video. So thanks.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
Thank
Thank you, doctor.
Nice
Thank you.
presentation.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. See you, Pam. Thanks. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yes,
Thank you, Kathleen.
yes, thank you, Kathy.